Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to the chilling world of Mr. Haunt. Please subscribe. It's our biggest motivation to keep bringing you spine-tingling stories. Let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, let's get into the stories. It had been a dream of mine for years to rent a small cabin, deep in the mountains, away from the chaos of the city. A place where I could finally get some peace, reflect, and escape from the endless noise of everyday life. So, when I found the perfect cabin, hidden in a quiet valley far from civilization, I jumped at the chance. The cabin was old but charming, wooden, with a large stone fireplace and a few scattered antiques. It sat beside a river, the sound of the water gently cascading over rocks, soothing in its constant flow. There was no electricity, no phone service, no internet, just the sounds of nature and the occasional crackle of the fire. It was exactly what I wanted. The first night was perfect. I lit the fire, poured myself a drink, and settled into the worn leather armchair near the hearth. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the room, but the fire kept the chill at bay. I was alone, just as I'd wanted. No distractions, no demands. It felt like freedom, but then, after the sun had completely set, I noticed something strange. A noise, a faint scraping sound from outside. It was so subtle at first that I thought I was imagining it. Maybe the wind moving the branches or some animal scurrying across the porch. But it came again, a soft scratching, like fingernails on wood. I glanced at the cabin's small front door, the only exit, and saw nothing. No movement, no shadows beyond the glass. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that it was just the sounds of nature settling for the night. But then it came again, louder this time, followed by a soft thud against the door. I stood up, my heart beginning to race. Something wasn't right. Slowly, I approached the door, my mind swirling with possibilities. Maybe it was a raccoon or some other animal, but that thought didn't sit well with me. I opened the door cautiously, shining my flashlight out into the night. Nothing. The porch was empty, just the night air and the rustling of leaves. No signs of anything unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I closed the door, locking it behind me. My heart was pounding now, and I tried to calm myself. I sat back down, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping into my chest. But the scratching sound came again, this time from the back of the cabin. It was unmistakable, louder and more insistent. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the table and slowly made my way to the back door. My breath felt shallow, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The room felt colder now, though the fire still blazed in the front room. I opened the back door, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The backyard was just a patch of wild grass and trees, with nothing out of the ordinary. There were no animals, no wind, just the eerie quiet of the mountains. Yet, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My skin crawled, and I could sense that something was wrong. I stepped outside, scanning the area, when I noticed something strange. A shape, a man, standing at the far edge of the yard, partially obscured by the trees. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but there was no mistaking the figure. It was tall, too tall for a normal person, and it didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still, staring into the cabin. I froze. My mind screamed at me to go back inside, but my feet wouldn't move. The figure didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. It was as though it was waiting, patiently. I backed away slowly, shutting the door behind me. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew one thing. It wasn't human. I grabbed my phone, But of course, there was no signal. The darkness outside felt suffocating, the cabin now a prison. I tried to call someone, anyone, but there was no way to reach anyone out here. I felt completely isolated. The scratching returned, louder this time, coming from all around the cabin. The walls themselves seemed to shudder under the pressure of it. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Was it the windows? The roof? The door? It felt as though the entire cabin was being surrounded. I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was an animal, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then the doorbell rang. I froze. The cabin had a doorbell. I hadn't even noticed it when I arrived. But there it was, ringing in the dead of night, echoing through the silence. I approached the front door slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. I opened the door, a crack, shining my flashlight out into the night. Nothing. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The porch was empty. The steps leading down into the yard were clear. But as I stepped down onto the gravel, I felt something cold and wet press against the back of my neck. I spun around, my flashlight falling to the ground. There, standing just inches behind me, was the man. But it wasn't a man. His face was pale, hollow, like the skin had been stretched too tight over his skull. His eyes were wide open, but there was no light behind them. His mouth hung open, too wide, with lips drawn back, revealing teeth that were far too long. His fingers were unnaturally long, curled like claws. I backed away, my breath coming in. Short, panicked gasps. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, as if waiting for something. I stumbled backward into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. The noise outside stopped, the scratching, the bell, everything. There was only the silence, the heavy silence that felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the hollow man, standing at the door, waiting. The next morning, I packed up and left. I didn't stay to see the sun rise. I just drove, not stopping until I was far from that cabin. To this day, I have no explanation for what I saw that night, but every time I tell the story, I remember the hollow man's eyes, and I feel the cold press against my neck all over again. I had always enjoyed the solitude of camping, especially at remote locations far from the reach of other people. The quiet, the stillness of the night, it was the perfect way to escape the noise of the world and reconnect with nature. But one weekend, that peace would be shattered, and I would never look at the woods the same way again. It was early October when I decided to head out for a solo trip. The weather had just started to cool down, and the trees were beginning to change colors, turning the forest into a beautiful mosaic of reds and yellows. I found a secluded spot deep in the mountains, a place I had never been before. The trail was overgrown, barely visible in some areas, which made it feel like I was the first person to ever step foot there. It seemed perfect. I arrived in the late afternoon, set up my tent by a small creek, and spent the rest of the evening preparing a small campfire. The sky turned orange as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ground. I sat back, feeling content, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of a stream running. But as night fell, something shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but the air felt different. The night was unusually still, not a single rustle of leaves. No sounds of critters scurrying through the underbrush. Nothing. Just the fires crackling and the distant wind in the trees. The quiet was suffocating, and it began to unsettle me as I sat there, staring into the fire. I began to notice something strange. Shadows. They were shifting, moving in ways that didn't make sense. It was as though the trees themselves were alive, stretching and bending at unnatural angles. But when I blinked, the shapes would go back to normal. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the firelight playing tricks on my eyes. I had been alone for a while, and maybe the isolation was starting to get to me. I tried to distract myself, taking out my phone to check for signal. No bars, of course. Just as I was about to put it back in my pocket, I heard it, a faint sound, like the crunch of leaves. It was distant at first, but then it grew closer. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, but not human. The sound was too heavy, too unnatural. My heart skipped a beat. I sat frozen, listening intently. The footsteps stopped just beyond the trees, too far to see anything but close enough to feel the presence. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight I had at my side, but I didn't move. I didn't dare. The silence stretched on, and I debated whether to call out, but something told me not to. There was something wrong about the way the footsteps had stopped. It wasn't like an animal pausing, listening. It was like it was waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to make the first move. Then, the shadows moved again. This time, they weren't just stretching. They were shifting toward me. It wasn't the trees this time. It was something else. The shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, creeping closer, like fingers reaching for me. I grabbed my flashlight, turning it on and aiming it toward the source of the movement. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees, but there was nothing there. Just the trees and the underbrush. My heart was pounding in my chest now, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my movements calm, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of there. And then I saw it. At the edge of the trees, just on the edge of the light, I saw a shape. It was massive, far too big to be any animal I knew. It was humanoid, but not. Its arms were long, its body hunched, and its head too large for its frame. The darkness seemed to cling to it, swallowing it whole, and I couldn't make out any real details. Only the outline and the hollow, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the light. It didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching. Its presence was suffocating. The shadows around it seemed to swirl, as if the very forest was bending and warping in response to it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot, my breath held tight in my chest. It was like time had stopped, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The figure vanished into the trees, the shadows retreating with it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but I couldn't. I couldn't understand what I had seen. And then I heard the footsteps again, only this time they were much closer, closer than before. I snapped into action. I grabbed my pack and tore down the trail, not caring about the direction. I didn't even bother to check if the flashlight was still on. I just ran. The branches whipped at my face, the sound of my footfalls heavy in the silence, the footsteps behind me growing louder, closer. I didn't stop until I reached my car, panting, my hands shaking. I didn't even look back at the trail. I just drove. To this day, I don't know what I saw in the forest that night. All I know is that whatever it wasn't something from this world. Something is out there, something that belongs to the darkness, and I will never return to those woods again. It started as a weekend trip. Just me, my gear, and the mountains. It had been a stressful few months, and I thought a solo hike would clear my head. I'd done it before, hiking alone in remote areas, but I never expected this time to be different. The trail was supposed to be easy, a well-marked path that wound through the dense forest and up toward a small overlook. The kind of hike where you can get lost in the landscape, not in your thoughts. When I arrived at the trailhead, there was no one else around. It was early, the sun barely cresting the horizon, and the only sound was the chirping of birds and the rustle of the wind through the trees. Perfect for solitude. I started off, my backpack snug against my shoulders. The weight of the gear, a comforting reminder of the adventure ahead. The trail was quiet, the path winding through the trees, the forest dense with pine and oak. It felt like a movie scene, tranquil, serene, but as I ventured deeper into the woods, something changed. The air grew heavier, and the sounds of the forest began to fade. The birds stopped singing, the wind died down. The quiet was overwhelming. I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the trail ahead, but something about the silence unsettled me. I could feel eyes on me, though I saw no one, no animals, no hikers, just the trees, the shadows, and the growing sense that something was watching. I decided to keep going. The overlook wasn't too far off, and I convinced myself that it was just my imagination. I'd been out here alone, plenty of times before, and nothing had ever happened. So I pushed forward, trying to shake the feeling that had settled in my gut. About an hour into the hike, I came to a clearing. The trail split here, one path leading up the mountain toward the overlook, the other veering off into thicker, more overgrown woods. I stood for a moment, deciding which path to take. The higher trail would offer better views, but the other path, well, it looked more interesting, a little more adventurous. I chose the second path, reasoning that I could always come back to the main trail later. The path quickly narrowed, the trees closing in around me. The forest felt different now, darker, more oppressive, like the trees were closing in. I walked for a while, each step taking me deeper into the forest. The sounds of the woods returned briefly, birds, squirrels, the rustle of leaves, but that odd sense of being watched never left. The feeling of eyes on the back of my neck was relentless. Then I saw it at first. It was just a shadow in the trees, barely noticeable, but as I looked closer, I could make out the shape. Something tall, too tall for a human, standing just out of reach of the sunlight. I stopped dead in my tracks. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was standing there, unmoving, watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just another hiker, someone who had taken a different path, but this thing didn't move like a person. It stood rigid, its form almost blending with the trees around it, but there was something about its posture that was wrong. Its head was too high, its shoulders too wide. It didn't belong in the woods. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My hand instinctively went to the pocket where my knife was, though I had no idea what I was expecting to do with it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the shape. Then, slowly, it moved. It didn't step forward or backward. It just shifted, like it had been standing perfectly still, and then suddenly decided to exist in another place, and then it was gone. Gone in the blink of an eye. I should have run then. I should have turned around and gone back to the trailhead. But something inside me, urged me forward. The need to know what it was, what had just disappeared into the trees, was stronger than the fear. I moved cautiously forward, the air feeling thick with tension. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone, that the forest itself was watching me. The trees, their dark branches stretching overhead, felt like they were closing in with every step I took. The path began to narrow, even more, the trees so close together that their branches intertwined, blocking out the sun. The air grew colder, and the silence returned. Not even the wind dared to stir the leaves. It felt as though the entire forest was holding its breath. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the earth beneath my feet. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep, too resonant. It came from behind me, from the direction I had just come from. I whipped around, my heart racing, but there was nothing, just the trees, standing still and silent, like they had been for hours. The growl came again, louder this time, and I felt the ground beneath me tremble. Whatever it was getting closer. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and ran. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground as I pushed through the dense underbrush. The growl grew louder with each step, closer, as though something massive was charging after me. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the trees, my legs burning with the effort. I couldn't hear anything but the sound of my own panic, stricken breathing in that growl, now deep and rumbling, echoing through the forest like a warning. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. I finally burst out of the woods and onto the main trail, where the sun broke through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. But the growl didn't stop. It was still there, faint but persistent, echoing from deep within the forest. I didn't stop running until I reached the parking lot, my heart racing and my hands shaking. I threw my gear in the car and drove away without looking back, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. I haven't been back to those woods. I don't think I ever will, but sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I can still hear that growl. And every time I close my eyes, I see that shape, watching me from the trees. I never thought I'd go camping again. After what happened, I can't imagine why anyone would. But life has a way of pushing you to revisit the things that scare you most. So, when my best friend Jake invited me on a weekend trip into the woods, I reluctantly agreed. I had to face it. Whatever it was, Jake and I had grown up together, always eager for an adventure. But we'd stopped going on these kinds of trips years ago, after what happened on our last outing. The thing we'd seen in the woods, the thing we couldn't explain. I told myself I was over it, that it was just a weird experience. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was terrified. Jake insisted on going back to the same spot, the same secluded area in the forest where we'd last camped. It wasn't a popular spot, which was part of the appeal. I didn't argue. I just packed my gear and went, hoping I could convince myself it was all in my head. We set up camp by the river, the same spot we'd chosen all those years ago. The trees towered over us, their thick trunks creating a canopy that shielded us from most of the sunlight. It felt peaceful at first, almost too peaceful, like the forest was holding its breath. As night began to fall, we built a fire and sat around it, cracking open beers and reminiscing about old times. I tried to ignore the creeping feeling that had started to stir in me, but it was there. The air felt thick, like the forest was too quiet, too still. I glanced around, trying to shake the unease. Jake didn't seem bothered. He was laughing, telling stories, but I noticed the tension in his shoulders. He kept glancing into the trees, almost like he was waiting for something. I didn't want to ask, but I couldn't help it. Jake, you're not still freaked out about what happened last time, are you? Jake looked at me, his face serious for the first time that night. I don't know, man. I try not to think about it, but there's something off about this place. The fire crackled between us, and I felt a shiver run through me. The same unease I had felt all those years ago started to creep in again. We didn't talk much after that. We just sat in silence, listening to the crackling fire and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. But the longer we sat there, the more I realized something. It was too quiet. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, were gone. There was nothing, just the fire and the distant sound of the river. I felt it then, The coldness, the watchful presence in the air. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Jake, do you hear that?" Jake didn't answer right away. He was staring into the trees, his eyes wide, his lips pressed into a tight line. "Yeah," he finally whispered. "I hear it." The noise was faint at first, like a low hum, but then it grew louder. It sounded like footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate. Something was moving through the forest, and it was coming closer. I scanned the trees, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was out there, watching us. The air had turned cold, the fire's warmth suddenly seeming like a distant memory. "Jake, we need to go. Now," I said, my voice shaking. Jake didn't move. He was frozen, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. "It's him," he whispered, barely audible. "It's the thing we saw last time." I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind raced, but I couldn't form any coherent thoughts. I turned toward the woods, where the footsteps were now growing louder, closer. The sound of something massive moving through the trees, the weight of each step echoing through the forest. Then, out of the darkness, I saw it. A figure, tall and broad, standing just beyond the firelight. It was massive, its shape hulking and almost unnatural. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, like the reflection of light off of glass, but there was something wrong about them. They didn't belong. I could feel my heart in my throat. I turned to Jake, but he was still staring, frozen in place, his face pale. Before I could speak, the creature moved. It wasn't fast, but it was purposeful, its steps heavy and deliberate as it approached the edge of the clearing, and then it stopped. The silence between us was unbearable. I could feel my blood pounding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed. The creature's eyes didn't leave us. It stood there, watching us, with a kind of calm patience, as though it was waiting for us to make the next move. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the trees, its massive form vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there. I don't know how long we sat there after that. Time seemed too slow, every second dragging on, until Jake finally broke the silence. "We need to leave. Now," he said, his voice shaking. We packed up in a rush, not bothering to check the fire, not caring about anything except getting out of there. The forest felt alive now, each tree a silent witness to the thing we had seen. We didn't speak again until we were back at the car, the safety of the headlights casting shadows that felt a little less threatening. We never talked about that night again. We never went back into the woods, but every once in a while, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the footsteps, and I still feel those eyes on me, watching. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. A few days to clear my head, away from the noise of the city and the distractions of everyday life. I'd been feeling restless for weeks, so when I found a secluded cabin for rent deep in the woods, I didn't hesitate. I needed peace. I needed quiet. A chance to get away from everything that had been weighing on me. I packed my bags, grabbed my gear, and headed off alone. It wasn't my first solo trip into the wilderness, but this place was different. The cabin was nestled at the edge of a dense forest, miles away from the nearest town, with nothing but miles of trees surrounding it. No neighbors, no traffic, just the hum of nature. The drive there was long and winding, the narrow road cutting through thick patches of forest. It was late in the afternoon when I arrived, the sky a-washed, out orange, as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The cabin was small but charming, with weathered wood and a stone chimney that looked as though it had been there for decades. It had a kind of charm that immediately made me feel at home. I spent the first evening settling in. The air smelled fresh, and the night was cooler than I expected, but it was peaceful. I made a fire, ate a simple dinner, and spent some time reading on the porch as the stars began to take over the sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of the world slip away, but as night fell deeper, something began to feel off. First, it was subtle. A rustling in the trees, a faint noise coming from beyond the clearing where I was sitting. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind, or perhaps a small animal. But then the noises grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps crunching the leaves and twigs on the ground. They didn't sound like an animal. They didn't sound like anything I had ever heard before. I stood up, straining my ears to listen more closely. I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the sound didn't stop. It was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped cautiously into the darkness, moving toward the edge of the forest. The light cut through the trees, revealing nothing but the thick underbrush and the twisted trunks of pine trees. I kept walking, the hair on the back of my neck prickling with every step. Then, I saw it. A shape, just beyond the beam of the flashlight. A shadow, tall and broad, standing motionless between the trees. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I stepped closer, the shape didn't disappear. It was still there, my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It was huge, standing at least 7 feet, tall, and covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes reflected the light from my flashlight, glowing eerily in the night. They were wide, almost human, but there was something wrong about them, something unsettling, as though they were aware of my presence. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The creature didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, watching me, and I could feel its gaze, cold and unnerving, piercing through the darkness. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the trees, moving with terrifying speed. I didn't wait to see where it had gone. I turned and ran back to the cabin as fast as I could, the flashlight trembling in my hand, casting erratic shadows on the ground. I locked the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. I could still hear the crunch of leaves outside, but I didn't dare go back out. The wind howled through the trees, but there was something else in the air, an unnatural silence, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. That night, I stayed awake, staring into the darkness, listening for any sound that would tell me I wasn't alone. The hours dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. I heard things, distant rustlings, low growls, the cracking of branches, yet I never saw anything again. But I could feel it. I knew it was out there by morning. I had packed my things and was ready to leave. I didn't care that it was still early. I didn't care about the cost of the rental. I just needed to get away from that place. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The trees seemed to lean closer as I passed, their branches reaching out, almost as if they were trying to grab me. And in the rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw something move along the edge of the forest, just beyond the clearing. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know what was out there in the woods with me, but I do know this. I'll never go back. I'll never go back into those woods. And I'll never forget the call of the wild. I've always loved the solitude of the forest. There's something about being out there, far from the noise of the world, that calms me. It's like the trees have a way of absorbing your worries and leaving you with nothing but the sound of your breath and the crunch of leaves beneath your boots. But that was before the shadow. In the pines, I didn't plan on going out that weekend. I had just finished a long week at work and was exhausted, but I couldn't shake the need to get away. So, I packed up my gear and headed to the cabin my family owned on the edge of the woods. It was a place I'd spent countless weekends growing up. We didn't have many neighbors, just a few scattered cabins, but the forest was our closest companion. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The sun was low, casting long, golden beams through the trees. The forest smelled of pine and earth, a scent I could never get enough of. I started a fire and set up my camp. The cabin had been abandoned for a while, but it was sturdy enough to keep me warm through the night. As the sun began to set, I ventured out for a short hike. I didn't go far, just along the familiar trail that led through the pine trees toward the small creek. The walk was peaceful, and I found myself taking in the sounds of the woods, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of branches in the wind. But there was something wrong. A strange stillness had settled over the forest. It wasn't the usual calm, but a thick, unnatural quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. I pushed forward, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping into my mind. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I squinted through the trees, I could make out the shape, tall, dark, and standing still among the pines. It wasn't an animal, or at least not anything I could immediately recognize. The shape was too large, too imposing. It was standing at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the reach of the fading light, as though it were waiting for me too. Notice it. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't dare move. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. The figure didn't move. It was massive, its outline dark against the dimming sky. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe it was just a trick of the shadows. But something deep in my gut told me it was something else entirely. Then, as if sensing my gaze, the figure shifted. Slowly, it turned its head, and for the briefest moment, I saw its eyes, a yellow, predatory glow that seemed to pierce the darkness. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. The trail I had walked down now seemed like a maze, and every step I took felt heavier, as if the forest itself was trying to slow me down. I could hear the sound of branches snapping behind me, the sound of something large following. I dared not look back, but I could feel it. Whatever was out there was getting closer. By the time I reached the cabin, I was gasping for breath, my legs trembling with the effort. I slammed the door shut behind me and bolted it, my heart racing. I didn't feel safe inside the cabin though. The silence of the forest had been replaced by the sound of my own panicked breaths. That night, I sat by the fire, trying to shake the image of the creature from my mind. I didn't dare go outside. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, but I could still hear something else. A distant growl, low and guttural, echoing through the woods. It was a sound I would never forget. The next morning, I left. I packed my things quickly, not caring about anything except getting out of the forest. I didn't take the trail I had used to get in. Instead, I made my way through the underbrush, trying to stay as far away from the pines as I could. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I never went back to that cabin. The forest had changed. It wasn't the same place I had grown up in. The trees had a presence now, something dark that seemed to loom over me every time I thought about it. I still hear the growl in my mind sometimes, echoing in the back of my thoughts, reminding me that whatever I saw that night, it's still out there, and it's waiting. It wasn't supposed to be a solo trip. My friend Mark and I had planned it for months, a weekend in the mountains, hiking through the untouched woods. We'd been looking forward to it, even discussing how we were going to capture some of the most beautiful footage for our hiking vlog. The plan was simple: head out, camp in a remote area, and get the shots we needed. But as it goes with most plans, life had a way of ruining them. Mark bailed out last minute. Something came up with his family, and I was left with the decision. to either cancel the trip or go alone. Against my better judgment, I decided to go anyway. After all, I knew the area, and I'd been hiking alone before. What could go wrong? I arrived at the trailhead early, the first rays of the sun creeping over the peaks. The air was crisp, and the pine trees stood tall, casting long shadows across the path. I felt the familiar rush of excitement, the kind you get when you're about to head into the wild, alone, but not entirely lonely. I had my camera, my gear, and a solid plan to follow the well-trodden path that would lead to a quiet camping spot by a small lake. The first few hours went by smoothly. The trail was serene, a steady ascent that wound through thick groves of pines. I could hear the occasional bird call, the wind whistling through the branches, but nothing unusual. There was a calm to the forest that I always found comforting, but as I pushed further, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Around midday, I came across a strange sight, a large, fresh set of footprints in the dirt. They were odd in shape, large, wide, with no discernible animal tracks around them. I knelt down to get a closer look, unsure what to make of them. They didn't look like bear prints or any other animal I knew of. The toes were too long, the arches too deep, like something far bigger than a bear or a human had made them. I stood up, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine, and pushed forward. But the deeper I went, the more that feeling of being watched lingered. The wind had died down, and the usual sounds of the forest, birds, insects, even the rustling of leaves, fell eerily silent. I couldn't explain it. The air felt thick, like the whole forest had drawn a breath and held it. By late afternoon, I reached the lake, a beautiful spot I knew well. It was isolated, surrounded by dense trees. I set up camp, boiling some water for tea and setting out my camera equipment. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, I thought about making a fire, but something stopped me. A strange unease gnawed at my stomach. I didn't want to draw attention. I decided to record a short video, documenting the calm and peace of the area. But just as I started talking, I heard it. A sound, far off at first, almost like a breath, a low rumble, but not the kind of sound an animal would make. It wasn't natural. My voice faltered for a moment, and I glanced around, trying to place it. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind, maybe. The forest has its odd noises, but it wasn't the wind. The sound came again, louder this time, a deep, guttural growl, followed by a strange, high-pitched noise that almost sounded like a whistle. It was coming from the trees on the far side of the lake. I froze. My hand hovered over my camera, and for a moment, I considered packing up and leaving. But my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to investigate. I walked cautiously towards the trees where I had heard the sounds. As I got closer, the feeling of being watched intensified. I could sense it now, the presence in the woods. It wasn't just the rustling of leaves or the sway of branches. It was alive, and it was aware of me. I could feel it in my chest, a tightening, an instinctive panic that said to turn around and run. But I didn't. The closer I got to the edge of the trees, the darker it seemed to get, as though the shadows themselves were thickening. My flashlight flickered once, then twice. I stopped walking, suddenly aware of the silence. It was absolute. Not a sound in the forest. No wind, no creatures moving. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. And then, there it was. A whisper. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves. But it was too clear now. It was words. The voice was low, gravelly, and rough, but it was unmistakable. And it was speaking in a language I didn't understand. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced. In my chest, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And I knew something was out there, just beyond the trees. I turned to leave, but my foot caught on something in the underbrush. My flashlight fell from my hand, clattering to the ground. the beam spinning wildly before it went out. I cursed under my breath, crouching down to find it. The whispering grew louder now, closer, as if whatever was making it was moving toward me. I grabbed the flashlight and turned it back on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the trees in front of me, and the unmistakable silhouette of something large standing just inside the tree line. It was tall, towering over the trees themselves. Its shape was massive, its body hunched, with broad shoulders and limbs that seemed almost too long. But it was the eyes that stuck with me, their yellow, almost glowing hue, staring directly at me from the darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The only sound now was my heartbeat, pounding in my ears. And then, the creature stepped forward. The ground seemed to tremble under its weight. I bolted. I ran faster than I've ever run before, not daring to look back. The sound of footsteps behind me echoed through the trees, but I didn't stop. I don't remember much about the run, only that I finally reached the safety of my camp, panting and terrified. I didn't dare go back to the lake that night. The next morning, I packed up and left, not looking back even once. It's been weeks since I left the mountains, but I can still hear that whisper when I close my eyes. I can still feel the weight of those eyes on me. Whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. I never thought of myself as superstitious. I grew up in the woods, after all. My family lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of a national park, surrounded by miles of dense forest. The kind of place where people get lost easily if they don't know their way around. I'd spent years hiking, hunting, and fishing, so I thought I knew the land like the back of my hand. That was, until I made the mistake of venturing too deep into the forest. It was the middle of autumn when I went out, a perfect day for a hike. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of red and gold, and the air was crisp and cool. I'd planned a short trip, a loop trail that would take me up to a ridge with a view of the valley below, then back down to the cabin. I've done this hike countless times before, but something about that day felt different. I started early, hoping to catch the sunrise from the top of the ridge. The woods were peaceful at first, only the crunch of dry leaves beneath my boots and the occasional chirp of a bird broke the silence. But as I walked deeper into the forest, something started to change. The light began to shift, like the sun was being obscured by something just out of sight. The shadows grew longer, deeper, and the usual sounds of the forest seemed to fall away. It felt almost as if the forest was holding its breath. I shook it off. It's easy to get lost in your head out there, and maybe I was just tired, or a little jumpy. But then, I heard it. A distant call, a sound that made my skin crawl. It was low, guttural, almost like a deep growl, but with a distinct rhythm to it. At first, I thought it was some animal, but the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't any animal I'd ever heard before. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the growl of a bear. It was something else. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the rocks and hills. It didn't sound like it was far off, but it also didn't seem to get any closer, almost as if it were coming from the very heart of the forest. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to turn back and head home, but curiosity got the better of me. I've been around these woods my whole life, after all. I wasn't afraid of some noise. It was probably just a bear or something else out for a walk. I kept going, but the further I went, the more the forest seemed to close in on me. The trees were denser, the shadows darker, and the air heavier. The sound, the call, kept coming, but it was different now. It had changed. It wasn't just a growl anymore. There was a rhythm to it, like something was trying to communicate with me, a warning, or maybe a lure. I pressed on, unwilling to turn back. even though my gut was telling me something was wrong. When I finally made it to the ridge, the view wasn't what I expected. The valley below was obscured by a thick mist that I hadn't seen on the way up. The air felt colder now, and the call, that sound, was louder, almost like it was directly beneath me. The forest stretched out for miles, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, but the forest was too vast. The mist had swallowed the land below, and I was left, standing there, exposed and vulnerable. That's when I saw it. A figure, dark, massive, and standing motionless between the trees, just beyond the ridge. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, some shadow cast by the tall trunks. But no, it was a shape, a silhouette, unmistakably large, with broad shoulders and a shape that seemed to shift unnaturally, as if it were aware of my gaze. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't move, didn't dare to blink. I just stared at it, frozen in place. The call came again, louder this time, vibrating through my bones. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. A wave of dread washed over me, and I instinctively stepped back, turning around and running. The noise, the call, followed me, echoing from all sides as I fled. The trees seemed to close in, and the mist thickened around me, disorienting me further. The way back down the ridge should have been familiar, but now it felt alien. My heart raced as I stumbled through the woods, branches snapping underfoot, the weight of the forest pressing in on me. Every time, I thought I heard the sound of my own footsteps. I could hear it again, the call, closer now, louder, like it was getting nearer with every step. I thought I was going to collapse from exhaustion, but I kept running, not daring to look behind me. When I finally stumbled out of the trees and back onto the main trail, I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down until I reached the cabin. I slammed the door shut behind me, breathing heavily, my hands shaking. I've been back to those woods since, but I never strayed too far from the trail. And I never forget that call, that sound that haunts the air around those mountains. I still don't know what I saw that day, whether it was some creature, some ancient thing that lives in the woods, or something else entirely. But I know this, something is out there, waiting, calling, and whatever it is, it doesn't want you to leave. I've always loved hiking, the thrill of being out in the wilderness, the smell of the pine trees, the stillness that comes with being miles away from civilization. It's a feeling I can't get anywhere else. But it's funny how a love for something can change when you're forced to face the things that lurk in the shadows. This story starts on one of those trips. I went hiking in the Cascades alone. I had taken the same route many times before, a few days in the mountains, alone, with my thoughts, the quiet beauty of nature. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip. I've always been cautious about hiking alone, but this was a familiar trail. It was one of the safer routes in the area, known for its breathtaking views and lack of dangerous wildlife. That's why I didn't think twice when I set out that morning. The first day went as planned, nothing out of the ordinary. I set up camp by a small stream and spent the afternoon fishing, enjoying the peace. That night, I sat by the fire, listening to the crackling wood and the distant calls of coyotes. But as the darkness settled in, something felt off. It started with the wind. I've hiked in the mountains long enough to know that the wind can change course unexpectedly, but this felt different. It wasn't a natural breeze. It felt heavy, oppressive, like it was pushing against me. I could hear the branches above swaying, but it didn't sound like the wind was moving through them. It sounded like something was moving through them. I shrugged it off at first. Just my imagination, I told myself. But when the wind shifted, it brought a low growl with it. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But I stopped, frozen in place, and waited. There it was again. A growl, a deep, guttural sound, almost like a warning. It didn't sound like a bear, not like any animal I'd ever heard before. I turned toward the sound, but saw nothing in the dark. Just the outline of trees, their trunks heavy with shadow. The moonlight barely filtered through the canopy, leaving me with little to go on. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. "It's nothing," I muttered, and added more wood to the fire. But the growl wasn't the only thing that lingered in the air. I felt something else, an undeniable presence, something watching me from just beyond the firelight. My skin prickled with the sensation that I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore it, wrapping myself in my sleeping bag and closing my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. The sounds of the forest were too loud, too alive, and the growling, it didn't stop. It came and went, rising in volume and intensity, circling the camp as though something was pacing just out of reach. I stayed awake until the first light of morning, too terrified to close my eyes. By the time the sun rose, I decided I couldn't stay another night. But my decision wasn't just about fear. It was the overwhelming sense that something was waiting for me. I packed up quickly and began the hike back down the mountain, but as I retraced my steps, the forest felt different. The trees seemed to close in around me, their towering trunks pressing in on all sides. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush made my heart skip a beat. And then, I heard it again, the growl. Closer this time. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air felt thicker, the silence that followed, oppressive. I stood there, listening, waiting, but the forest offered no answers. No animals stirred, no breeze moved through the leaves. It was as if the world itself had gone quiet, leaving only the low growl to echo through the trees. I turned to look around, my heart hammering in my chest, and then, there it was. A figure, tall, hulking, standing just beyond the trees, barely visible in the shadows. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man, it was something other. The way it moved, the way it stood, was wrong. Too large, too broad, its shape too distorted for any creature I knew. I couldn't move. My feet were frozen to the ground, my body refusing to react. All I could do was watch as it stepped forward, slowly and deliberately, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The growl became a rumble, deep in its chest, reverberating through the trees. My instinct was to run, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from it. And that's when I realized, this thing, whatever it was, had been following me. It wasn't just a random encounter. It had been waiting for me to make a mistake. It took another step forward. The air was thick with tension, the forest alive with the sound of my pulse in my ears. Finally, I managed to move. My legs were shaky, my body screaming to flee, but I forced myself to turn and run. I don't know how long I ran. My mind was too clouded with fear to count the distance, but I didn't stop. I just kept pushing through the trees, stumbling over rocks, branches slapping my face as I moved. Somehow, I made it to the trailhead. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the engine roaring to life beneath me. The wilderness stretched out before me, silent and still. I drove as fast as I could, not looking back once, but even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the growl, still feel the weight of that presence watching me from the pines. It's not a memory I can shake. I've been back to those mountains since, but I'll never forget what I saw. Something was out there, waiting, watching, and it wasn't finished with me. The forest has a way of keeping its secrets, but sometimes, it lets them out. It started on a weekend trip to a cabin my wife, Sarah, and I rented in the Cascade Mountains. We had been planning it for months, just a quiet retreat to get away from work and the chaos of city life. We'd rented a small remote cabin nestled in the pines, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by untouched wilderness, the kind of place where you can hear every little noise, every snap of a twig, every gust of wind. The cabin itself was charming, wooden, old but well maintained, with a fireplace, a huge window overlooking the trees, and no phone service, exactly what we wanted. After unpacking and getting settled, we spent the first evening cooking dinner, reading, and enjoying the peace. But by the second night, things started to change. We were sitting by the fire, sipping wine, when we first heard it, a rustling sound just outside the cabin. It was subtle at first, like a breeze moving through the branches, but it quickly became louder, more deliberate. I assumed it was a deer, or maybe a raccoon getting too close to the cabin. But then, it stopped, completely. I glanced at Sarah, and she looked at me, the same confused expression on her face. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, standing up. "I'll go check." I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The night was cold, and the forest felt alive, almost too alive. The trees swayed gently in the wind, but the air was unnervingly still. There was no sound, no insects, no owls, just silence. I scanned the trees, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The shadows in the forest seemed to move with the light, but I saw nothing. Probably just a raccoon. I muttered to myself, heading back inside, but as I was about to shut the door, I heard something, heavy breathing. Not just the sound of a creature in the woods, but a deep, guttural inhalation, like something, or someone was waiting. I froze. The sound came from just beyond the tree line. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. Sarah was staring at me, her face pale. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, trying to calm myself down. Maybe just a bear or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. That night, we didn't sleep much. I kept hearing faint sounds, footsteps, distant calls, that same heavy breathing. But every time I'd get up to check, the cabin was empty. There was no sign of anything. No tracks, no movement, just the oppressive silence of the forest pressing in around us. The next morning we decided to go for a hike to clear our heads. We walked through the woods, the morning sun filtering through the trees. It was peaceful, and for a moment, I almost forgot the strange events of the night before. But then we came across something that changed everything. A set of footprints. They were massive, easily 1.5 feet long, and they were so deep in the mud that they almost looked as though they had been left by something much heavier than a person. The shape wasn't quite human though. The toes were too wide, too elongated, and the heels too large. They didn't look like any animal tracks I knew. I knelt down to examine them, and that's when I felt it. The sensation that we were not alone. I looked up, scanning the trees. Nothing, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my stomach twisted with a feeling of dread. "Let's head back," I said to Sarah, trying to keep my voice steady. Now, we turned around, but as we walked back toward the cabin, I noticed something else. Movement in the trees, just beyond our line of sight. Something tall and dark, shifting between the trunks. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was too big, too wide. I couldn't make out any details. Just the shape of something enormous. Watching us, we hurried back to the cabin, and for the rest of the day, we stayed inside. The windows locked, the blinds drawn. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing we had seen earlier was getting closer. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, set my nerves on edge. Around midnight, I heard it again, footsteps. But this time, they were right outside the window. Heavy, slow, like something was pacing the cabin, watching us. I grabbed the rifle we had brought with us, though I knew it wouldn't help if whatever was out there wanted to get in. And then, a voice died low, muffled, like it was coming from the other side of the glass. It wasn't a word, just a guttural growl. I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I stood completely still, barely breathing. Sarah was awake now, clutching the blanket to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. And then, it happened. The window, next to me, right next to my shoulder, shuddered, as if something had slammed into it from the outside. I jumped back, my heart in my throat. The growl came again, louder this time, almost snarling. I couldn't take it anymore. We grabbed our bags, ran out the door, and didn't look back. We sprinted through the trees, my mind racing, my legs burning, until we reached the truck. Didn't care about anything else. We just had to get out of there. I don't know what was out there in the forest that night, but I do know it wasn't anything natural. The size of it, the growls, the way it moved. This wasn't a bear, a cougar, or anything I've ever heard of. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for just a second, I thought I saw something tall and dark standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us. We haven't been back to that cabin, and I don't think we ever will. I don't know what it was, but I know this much. The forest doesn't always want to let you leave. I grew up in a small town in northern Idaho, a place where the nearest neighbor was miles away, and the nearest grocery store was a half-hour drive. Our house sat on the edge of a dense forest, one that stretched for miles in every direction. We were used to the sounds of wildlife, owls hooting, deer rustling through the underbrush, the occasional bear or cougar. But something about that forest always made me uneasy. I didn't realize how much until that summer. It was the summer after my senior year of high school. My friend Liam and I decided to camp out in the woods for a few days, just to get away from everything. Liam was the adventurous type, the one who'd always talk me into doing stupid things. But this time, I was eager to escape the town. The pressure of college applications and family drama had been building up, and I thought a few days away from it all would clear my head. We left on a Thursday afternoon, loaded up our gear, and hiked a few miles into the forest to set up camp. The spot we chose was perfect, secluded, quiet, near a creek with plenty of shade. We spent the day fishing, laughing, and cooking over the fire. It was a good time, just like the old days. As night fell, the temperature dropped. We sat by the fire, telling stories, trying to scare each other. Liam kept talking about the wild stories he'd heard about people vanishing in the woods, but I wasn't buying it. Still, there was something about the air that felt thicker, like the trees were closing in around us. It wasn't until later that night that I heard it, a rustling in the trees. At first, I thought it was just a deer, but then it happened again, closer this time. I stood up, squinting into the darkness, trying to make out any movement. Liam was still talking, oblivious to the fact that something wasn't right. Then, I heard it, a sharp snap of a branch. Whatever it was big. I glanced at Liam. "Did you hear that?" He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. He didn't need to answer. I could see it in his eyes. He heard it too. We sat there, motionless, staring into the darkness. The rustling grew louder, closer. It wasn't just one animal. It was something moving deliberately through the trees, making no effort to hide its presence. Then, a deep, low grunt echoed from somewhere in the distance. It was not the sound of any animal I knew. I grabbed the flashlight, shining it into the woods, but I saw nothing. The fog from the creek had rolled in, thick and heavy, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. The sound stopped. Then, we heard something else, a voice, or at least, it sounded like a voice. It was low, guttural, barely a whisper, but we both heard it. It wasn't human, not even close. "Go away," The words were clear enough, but the voice was something that didn't belong. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could see Liam was just as scared as I was. But neither of us moved. And then, we saw it. A shadow, just outside the circle of light, cast by the fire. Something massive, standing upright, on two legs, its outline distorted by the fog. It was tall, taller than any man should be, easily 8 feet. The figure was covered in dark fur, but it didn't move like an animal. It was deliberate, watching us. The air seemed to thicken around it. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away, even though every part of me screamed to run, and then it stepped forward. Just enough for the light to catch its eyes. They were yellow. Not the reflective kind you get from an animal's eyes in the dark, but something unnatural. The eyes were almost human, but too wide, too predatory. I couldn't breathe. Liam finally snapped out of it. He grabbed my arm and yanked me back. "Run," he screamed. We both bolted toward the creek, not looking back. The forest seemed to shift around us as we ran, the trees closing in like they were trying to trap us. I stumbled twice, the weight of the fear dragging me down. We made it back to the campsite and grabbed what we could, our backpacks, the tent, the cooking gear, and we didn't stop until we hit the truck. We left everything behind. The drive back was a blur. We didn't speak a word to each other. We just kept our eyes on the road, watching the rearview mirror, as if expecting something to follow us. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. Whatever it was something older, something that had been watching us from the shadows for far longer than we could understand. We never went back, and as I sit here now, years later, I can still feel the weight of its eyes on me. It's the kind of thing that doesn't let go. That forest, those trees, they hold secrets, and they're not willing to share them. Some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, just me and my brother, Mark. We'd gone to the same spot every summer since we were kids, an old, secluded campground just outside of Olympic National Park in Washington State. No cell service, no distractions, just hiking, fishing, and the peace that comes from being miles away from the world. But that year, 2018, it was different. I don't know why. Something felt off from the moment we arrived. We set up our tents and unpacked around mid-afternoon. The weather had been perfect for days, but as soon as we hit the woods, the air seemed heavier, colder. Mark didn't notice it at first. He was too busy setting up the fire pit, cracking jokes like usual. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by dusk. The fog rolled in, thick and silent. It smothered the trail, blurred the trees, and made the familiar woods feel foreign. The silence felt wrong, too. No rustling, leaves, no birds, no insects buzzing. Just the quiet hum of the world holding its breath. Mark didn't seem bothered, but I couldn't stop looking into the fog, waiting for something to move. That night, around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something scratching outside the tent. Not wind, not branches. This was sharp, deliberate, like claws against fabric. I tensed, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. Instead, it got louder, closer. I shook Mark awake. His eyes were groggy, but I could see the shift in him as soon as he heard it too. We both listened, trying to make sense of the sound. Then it stopped. Just like that. The silence was worse than the noise. I grabbed the flashlight and we unzipped the tent cautiously. Outside, the fog swallowed everything. We couldn't see more than a few feet in front of us, but we heard it, movement in the distance. Like something walking, heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer. This was something bigger, Mark muttered. It's probably a moose. Let's just go back to sleep. But I couldn't. I felt it. The weight of something huge and close. I could almost feel the air move as it passed. Mark didn't understand. He never did. The next day, we went hiking as planned, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. The fog had lifted by morning, but the forest felt different. The trees were denser, more oppressive, and the ground seemed to sink beneath our feet as we hiked deeper into the forest. Mark noticed something strange. Tracks. Large, deep impressions in the mud, like someone, or something, had walked through the woods without concern for the ground beneath it. The tracks were huge, easily 20 inches long, and the spacing between them suggested a massive stride. Probably a bear, Mark said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. I wasn't so sure. I'd seen enough wildlife to know what a bear track looked like. This wasn't that. But we pressed on. As the day wore on, we came to a clearing with a small creek running through it. We decided to stop and have lunch, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt like I could breathe again. The air seemed warmer, and the sunlight broke through the canopy above us, casting a peaceful glow over the water. But then I saw them, eyes not far off, barely visible through the trees on the opposite bank. A set of dark, gleaming eyes, reflecting the sunlight like a predator waiting for its moment. I froze. Mark noticed, following my gaze, but he didn't see it at first. Then, the eyes blinked, slowly, and that's when Mark saw it too. Jesus, he whispered, his voice barely audible. What the hell is that? We both watched as the eyes moved, not in a natural way, but almost deliberately, like they were studying us. And then, they disappeared behind a thick cluster of trees. I don't know what made me do it, but I grabbed the rifle we'd brought with us. We need to leave, now, I told Mark. We didn't even bother packing up our things. We just grabbed what we could and started hiking back to camp. But the fog came back. This time, it rolled in faster, thicker, faster than I'd ever seen it move. The air got colder again, and I could hear it, something walking behind us, just beyond the fog. Keeping pace with us, we pushed forward, the trail now a blur, the ground turning soft and treacherous beneath our feet. Every now and then, I heard a branch snap, a footfall crunch, but I didn't turn around. It wasn't until we reached the clearing near camp that I heard it again. The growl, low, rumbling. It vibrated through my bones. Mark and I sprinted the last 100 yards back to the camp. The fire had gone out. The tents were still there, but everything felt off. I didn't sleep that night. Mark did, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear those heavy footsteps, the sound of something circling us, keeping its distance, but never leaving. The next morning, we packed up without saying much. Neither of us mentioned what happened. Neither of us wanted to. We left the woods and never went back. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear or a cougar, but those eyes, the way they moved, that feeling of being hunted. Somewhere in those woods, something watched us that day, and I don't think it was a creature from this world. I wasn't always the kind of man who believed in stories. Not ghosts, not creatures, and definitely not Bigfoot. But what happened in Black Hollow made me question everything I ever thought was impossible. It was 2016 when my cousin Cody invited me to go night fishing with him near a secluded stretch of water deep in the hills of West Virginia, a place called Black Hollow Lake. It wasn't on any map, not really. Just a runoff pond at the bottom of a steep ravine, surrounded by state forest. Locals say don't fish there after dark, he said, grinning like it was a dare. They say it screams at night. I laughed, thought he was full of it, but I was going through a rough patch. Divorce, job gone. So the idea of beers by a quiet lake didn't sound so bad. We left around 5 p.m., took his old Tacoma through winding back roads, then hiked the rest of the way down a deer path. It was dusk when we got to the lake. Fog sat heavy on the water like a blanket. The trees leaned in, gnarled and close, like they were trying to listen. We set up by a half-rotten dock someone had built long ago. The water barely moved. No frogs, no crickets, just the sound of our lures hitting the surface and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere. Behind us, around 9:30 p.m., the temperature dropped, fast. I remember that sudden chill like it slapped me. Then we heard it, a scream, not a woman, not an animal, something else. It came from across the lake, up on the ridge, long and hollow, like a person screaming through a tunnel, but deeper, more primal. It echoed, vibrated through my chest, like bass from a concert. Cody went dead quiet. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the thing they talk about." I tried to laugh it off. "Probably a fox or bobcat." "No," he cut me off. "You've never heard this before. Just wait." A few minutes later, it screamed again. Closer this time. We packed up, fast. The trail back out was steep. Roots and rocks everywhere. Our flashlights barely cut through the trees. That's when we heard branches cracking, off to the side. Something big was moving, pacing us, not fast, not hiding, just keeping pace. We stopped, and it stopped. I turned, shined the flashlight into the trees, and for a split second, I swear to God, I saw it. Tall, hunched, covered in dark, wet-looking hair, eyes reflecting yellow in the light, like an animal. But it wasn't afraid of us. It stood there like it knew we couldn't do anything. Then, it screamed again, right there on the trail, and I dropped the flashlight. We ran, stumbled, fell, got cut up on briars and branches. Cody twisted his ankle, but we didn't stop. I don't remember how we made it to the truck. I just remember slamming the door and locking it like that would actually help. We sat there in silence, both of us too shaken to speak. Then we heard it again, the scream, farther now, moving off into the trees. When we finally got out of there, it was nearly 2 a.m. Cody never went back, sold the truck a month later, moved to Georgia. I kept thinking maybe it was a bear with mange, some injured animal. But the screams, those didn't belong to anything that should exist in these woods. I went back once, during the day, found the dock again, though it had mostly sunk, and on a tree, just above the shoreline, I saw it. 3 long claw marks, fresh, deep. There are places in this country where stories aren't just stories. They're warnings. Black Hollow is one of them, and if you hear the scream, don't stop. Don't look, just go. My name is Mason, and I grew up in southern Oregon, just outside a little logging town called Glide. Most of what surrounded us was thick, ancient forest, Douglas firs so tall they blotted out the sky, deer trails that twisted for miles, and more logging roads than actual streets. My father, Curtis, worked as a timber scaler. He'd hike out alone most days to measure felled logs and mark them for hauling. A quiet man, the kind who didn't talk unless he had something worth saying, and when he did speak, we listened. One evening when I was 12, I remember him coming, in late, mud to his knees, pale as chalk. He didn't say a word, just took a shower and sat in his chair, staring at the wall, like he'd seen a ghost. My mother asked what happened, and all he said was, "Something's watching us up there." I didn't think much of it then. Thought maybe he ran into a cougar or a bear. But I never forgot the look in his eyes, and years later, I learned just how wrong I'd been. It was after he died, suddenly, from a heart attack, at only 58. While going through his things, I found a shoebox in the attic. Inside were three things: a bundle of worn field notebooks, a cassette recorder, a single .357 revolver with only 2 bullets. The notebooks were filled with strange entries, short, clipped descriptions of something he referred to only as the shadow. Not a metaphor, he meant it literally. Saw it again near plot 12, behind the stump. Thought it was a burned log, but it moved. No sound when it walks, no smell, but the woods go dead when it's near. Too tall to be a man, covered in dark hair, doesn't blink. What chilled me was how clinical his notes were. Not scared, just observant, like he'd been studying it. The cassette was dated 6 months before he died. I listened to it alone, in the garage, while the rain hit the roof like nails. At first, I just heard forest sounds. Wind, rustling leaves, his footsteps on gravel. Then his voice, low and shaky. It's back. Same place. Standing by the ridgeline. Jesus, it's looking right at me. There was a pause, then something else. A growl, low, guttural, inhuman. Followed by 3 heavy steps, and a snapping branch that sounded thick as a thigh bone. Then my father whispering, "This ain't a bear." Click. I rewound it and listened again, over and over. He wasn't panicked, but you could hear the strain in his voice, like he was trying to keep it together. After that, I started digging. I talked to his old logging buddies, men who'd worked those woods with him for decades. One of them, Frank Dillard, was drunk when he finally told me the truth. "We all seen it, Mason," he muttered. "Back in the 90s, near where your daddy used to work. Big thing, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, built like a linebacker, black, as oil, wouldn't make a sound. Just watch." He said a few guys quit after a sighting, but your dad stayed. Said he needed to know what it was. Frank also said that a section of forest, near Buckhorn Trail, was unofficially marked off limits, not by the company, by the men. They called it the dead zone. Said animals wouldn't go there. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. I went there, took Dad's old .357, left early, and hiked all day until I found it, just like he described. The trees were spaced oddly, twisted like they'd grown away from something. No underbrush, no tracks, just silence. That bone, deep silence, where even your own heartbeat feels too loud. I stayed for maybe 10 minutes before I felt it. The weight of something watching, like being under a lens. I didn't see it, but I smelled something. Wet, fur, rot, copper. And then I heard a stick snap. Just one, and I ran. I'm not proud of that, but every instinct I had screamed leave. I made it back to my truck before dark, shaking, ears ringing with that silence. I haven't been back. My father didn't die from a weak heart. I think he died because he spent too long locked in a staring contest with something no man was ever meant to understand. The forest keeps its secrets, but some of us carry pieces of them out, and we either bury them deep or let them consume us. I chose to tell you. That's all I can do. People ask why I quit my job as a wilderness surveyor for the state. I usually say it was the isolation, or burnout, or some vague excuse about family. Truth is, I don't know how to explain what happened without sounding insane, but I'm tired of holding it in. This happened 3 years ago in Washington State, deep in the Cascades. My job was to mark unmaintained logging roads, essentially checking whether old trails were safe, overgrown, or worth reopening. I'd be out for days at a time, camping out of my truck, logging GPS coordinates, snapping photos. I was covering an old trail, road for 1B, that hadn't been touched since the 80s. The forest out there had swallowed most of it. No cell reception, no nearby ranger stations. Just me, a GPS unit, a .45 sidearm, and the kind of silence that makes you notice your own heartbeat. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp about 10 miles in, just off a crumbling switchback. Around sunset, I noticed something odd. No birds, no rustling. Even the bugs were quiet. It was like the forest held its breath. Then I found the footprints. They were near a dried creek bed, massive, easily 18 inches long, with clear toes, no boot tread, and deep. Whatever made them was heavy. I followed the tracks for a bit, thinking it might be a bear walking oddly, but they led into the thickest brush imaginable. No way anything that big was squeezing through without making a sound. That night, I barely slept. Not because of fear, because of a sound. It started around 2 a.m., a low rhythmic knocking, 3 knocks in a row, always 3, distant at first, but it moved, closer, always keeping the same rhythm. I'd heard of wood knocking from old Bigfoot stories, but never took them seriously. Until then. It stopped just before dawn. I packed up that morning, planning to head back early, but when I turned on the GPS, it was blank. No coordinates, just static, like it had been wiped. I fired up the backup unit. Same result. I checked my analog compass. The needle spun for a moment, then just stopped. Pointed due north, and wouldn't move, no matter how I turned. I started hiking back the way I came. No truck, no tire marks, no trail. It was gone. I tried to retrace my path, using the sun and landmarks, but the forest shifted. I don't know how else to explain it. Trees I had marked with orange tape weren't there. Boulders were in different places. I felt like I was being led in circles. Worse, like I was being herded. Then I saw it, through the trees. Maybe 30 yards out was a figure, tall, 7 feet at least. Broad shoulders, covered in what looked like black matted hair. But the strangest part was how still it stood, like a statue. Its head was cocked slightly, as if listening. I ducked behind a tree, holding my breath. When I peeked again, it was gone, but the knocking came back. 3 hits, closer this time. I ran. I don't remember how long. Just ran, crashing through brush, thorns tearing my clothes, lungs burning. The forest blurred. Then everything went quiet again. Not peaceful. Wrong. That's when I found the truck. It was parked exactly where I had left it. Engine cold, gear untouched, but something was off. My tent was folded, my gear repacked. My thermos was still warm, like someone had just poured coffee. But I hadn't touched it since morning. I looked at my watch. It said 7:12 a.m. only. I left camp at 10 a.m. yesterday. I drove straight to the ranger station. They told me I'd been gone for 3 days. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. But somehow, my truck had 50 more miles on it than when I left, and my camera roll was completely wiped, except for one photo, a blurry image taken just before dawn. Trees. A shape in the corner, tall, black, eyes reflecting red, staring at the lens. I didn't take that photo. I quit the next week. I still have nightmares about that knock. The 3-beat rhythm. Sometimes I hear it in the walls of my house, deep in the night, when everything goes still and my dog whimpers for no reason. I never went back to the forest. And if you ever find yourself on an old logging road that doesn't show up on the map, turn around. My name's Lydia. I don't talk about this much, not because I'm scared, but because people tend to treat you differently once you've said something unbelievable out loud. But I was there. I saw what I saw, and no amount of silence is going to erase it from my mind. This happened in 1996, when I was 16 and living with my grandmother in a little valley outside Harlan County, Kentucky. My mom had taken off with some guy from Ohio and left me behind. Granny said it was a blessing in disguise. I used to hate how far out her house was. No neighbors for miles. No phone line. Barely working TV. But the older I get, the more I understand why people like her stayed off the grid. They knew things. Granny had a rule about the woods. Don't ever go past the third fence post after sundown. That was it. Simple. No reason given. No story attached. Just a line in the dirt she expected me to obey. I broke that rule. The night Will Harding dared me to follow him into Briar Hollow. Will was a local boy, good looking in a scrappy barefoot kind of way. He'd lived there his whole life, knew every trail and hunting spot. We were messing around near the hollow around dusk, skipping stones in the creek and daring each other to do stupid stuff, like teens do. You ever heard the screamer? He asked suddenly. I shook my head. Is that like some ghost story? He looked me dead in the eyes. Ain't no story. You'll hear it when the sky goes black. Comes from up the ridge, right around that crooked pine. He pointed to a tree, leaning like it had been snapped and caught halfway down. They say it's Bigfoot, or something like it. Only it don't walk so much as glide. Real tall, red eyes. Comes for anything smaller than it. I rolled my eyes. You're just trying to scare me. He grinned. Then let's go see. Tough girl. So we did. We crossed the third fence post, just as the sun vanished. I remember how fast the cold came on, like flipping a switch. The crickets stopped. The creek went silent. Even the air felt hollow. We climbed up near that crooked pine, laughing nervously. I was starting to think it was all just a dumb joke. Then we heard it. A sound I'll never forget. It started low, like wind howling through a tunnel, but it grew higher and higher until it turned into a blood-curdling scream. Not animal, not human. Something between Will turned to run, but he slipped, rolled his ankle bad. I grabbed him and we stumbled downhill together, crashing through briars and roots. That's when I saw it, standing in the dark, backlit by the sliver of moonlight through the trees. At first, I thought it was a burned tree trunk, tall, black, unmoving. But then it shifted, leaned, watched us. Its eyes burned red, not like a reflection but like they had their own light. It didn't chase us. It just stood there, and I swear to God, I heard it whisper my name, Lee Daya. We made it back, to Granny's fence, barely upright. Will was crying. I was shaking too bad to get the gate open. Granny came out with her shotgun, said nothing, just helped us inside and locked every door behind us. Later that night, after Will had gone home, I asked her, "What is it?" She said, "A thing that don't belong here, a watcher. It ain't quite man, but it used to be." We stopped speaking its name when the forest took it back. I pressed her for more, but that was all she'd ever say. Will moved away not long after. Never said goodbye, just left with his dad to Indiana. I heard he never set foot in the woods again. Me. I learned to listen. Now I live in Georgia, with my own daughter. We've got woods behind the house. Big ones. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I hear a whisper rise through the trees. Low, stretched, and cruel. And I never go past the third post after dark. I used to laugh at the idea of Bigfoot. I was a rational guy. Still am, in most ways. My name's Marcus, and I lived for 6 years in a cabin near the Umpqua National Forest in Oregon. Worked remotely as a software developer, traded the city life for clean air, and thought I'd found paradise. Just me, my German Shepherd Layla, and a whole lot of silence. It started with the trees. I'd come outside in the mornings and find pine cones piled on my front steps in neat stacks, 3 or 4 at a time, always symmetrical, always placed after dark. I chalked it up to squirrels or wind patterns until it started happening every night. Then came the footprints, huge, too big for a man. Barefoot, with clearly defined toes and a long stride. I found them by the shed one morning, laid side by side with Layla's paw prints. Her hackles stood up as we approached, but she didn't bark, just growled, low and steady, tail tucked. That was the first time I got the feeling something was watching us. Over the next couple of weeks, the forest changed. Birds stopped coming close. I stopped hearing the usual nighttime critters. No crickets, no owls, not even raccoons rummaging through the trash. Instead, I'd hear thuds heavy ones, like something dropping onto the ground from the trees. One night around 2 a.m., I woke to Layla barking like I'd never heard before. She was in full alert mode, facing the back door, hackles raised, teeth bared. Then I heard its steps on the roof, slow, deliberate, heavy. I froze in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. The steps moved from one end of the cabin to the other, then paused, right above me. There was a scrape, like claws or something rough dragging across the shingles. I sat there in the dark, gun in hand, praying it was a bear. But bears don't walk like that. And they don't stay that quiet. The next morning, I climbed up there to look. There were dents in the metal roofing panels, long scrapes, and a patch of dried mud where something very large had crouched. I didn't sleep that next night. 2 days later, Layla disappeared. I let her out before bed, like always. I usually stand by the door while she does her business, but I was distracted, on a call with my brother, actually. I stepped inside for maybe 2 minutes. When I came back, she was gone. No barking, no yelping, just gone. I searched for hours, flashlight, boots, calling her name, until my throat was raw. I found her collar the next morning, about 30 yards into the woods. Just the collar, not a drop of blood, and next to it, another footprint. Bigger than before, deeper, kneeling, like whatever it was had stopped and watched me from that very spot. I filed a report with the ranger's office. They told me mountain lions sometimes take dogs. But there were no drag marks, no blood, no struggle, just a silent disappearance. That broke me. I couldn't stay. I packed up and moved out a week later. 2 days before I left, I heard it again. The roof. This time I didn't move. I just lay there, gripping the mattress, breathing through my teeth as something big and slow crept over the cabin, directly above my bedroom. I could hear it sniffing. Then it let out a sound that made every hair on my body stand up, low, guttural, almost like a hum, and it jumped off. The thud rattled the glassware in the kitchen. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sold the cabin that spring, dirt cheap, to a retired couple from California who said they were into wildlife. I warned them about bears. That's all I could say. But I still think about Layla. I still dream about that night. The pressure of those footsteps overhead, the growl in its throat, and the way the woods just stopped making sense. And sometimes, when I'm walking through my new neighborhood, I swear I hear that hum in the wind. I grew up in the rural sprawl, just outside of Missoula, Montana, back when the internet still made screeching noises and cell phones were luxury items. Our town had a population smaller than your average high school. Folks worked hard, went to church, and mostly minded their own business. Except when it came to the Miller place. Everyone knew something was wrong out there. The house sat up on Bear Creek Road, about a mile past where the pavement turned to gravel. It was surrounded by tall timber, dense pines that whispered even when the wind didn't blow. The Millers were quiet, old-timers, kept to themselves, rarely came into town. Their youngest, Jesse, was my age. We were in the same third-grade class for a year, before his folks pulled him out to homeschool him. Rumors spread, as they do. Some said Jesse was slow. Others said he'd seen something in the woods that left him off. Kids can be cruel, and we were no different. One summer I saw Jesse again. I must have been 12. I was biking along the old logging road behind our place when I spotted him standing by the tree line. He looked different, taller, but real skinny, pale as a sheet, even in the sun. "Hey," I called out. He didn't answer, just stared. "You all right?" Still nothing. And then, just as I started pedaling closer, he turned and bolted into the trees. No hesitation, no path, just vanished like a deer. I told my dad when I got home. He paused, then muttered, "You stay away from the miller's land, yeah?" I asked why, and he didn't answer. Just went back to sharpening his hunting knives. Things got weirder that fall. Hunters started reporting strange signs. Game trails going cold. Deer carcasses found gutted, but untouched, like something killed. For sport. One guy claimed he saw a figure crouched in the road at dusk. Huge, covered in dark hair, and not a bear. Everyone laughed him off at the diner. But I saw the way his hands trembled as he sipped his coffee. Then Jesse disappeared. His parents reported him missing, though no one remembers seeing them come into town to do it. The sheriff went up there and came back looking 20 years older. Said there were unusual circumstances, but nothing criminal. They closed the case a week. Later, nobody looked too hard. My friend Graham and I were dumb, restless kids, so of course we decided to sneak onto the Miller property. We told ourselves it was for answers, but truth was, we wanted a thrill. We crossed into their land one October evening, right as the sun dipped behind the hills. The place looked abandoned, windows boarded up, yard overgrown. The only sound was our boots crunching leaves and the occasional bird breaking the silence. Behind the house, we found a trail. Not a man, made one, an animal path. Wide, too wide. Trees had been bent, twisted unnaturally. We followed it for maybe a quarter mile until we reached a clearing, and there it was, a pit, 6 feet across, circular, lined with stones and bones, hundreds of them, some animal, some not. I turned to Graham, but he was already backing away, eyes wide, and then we heard it. A sound I still can't describe. Low, wet, like a growl bubbling up from a place that shouldn't exist. It came from the trees. We didn't wait. We ran, fast and reckless, branches whipping our faces, lungs on fire. I tripped once, something brushed my ankle, and for a second I felt a weight behind me, just outside my vision. We didn't stop until we reached my back fence. Neither of us spoke. We never went back. A month later, the Miller house burned to the ground. No cause was ever found, no bodies recovered, and just like that, it was like the Millers never existed. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind's just right, and the trees shift in that slow, deliberate way, I remember Jesse's eyes, and how whatever was in those woods that took him might still be out there waiting. My name's Warren. I'm a retired sheriff's deputy from a tiny town called Dry Hollow, tucked deep in the Appalachian side of Tennessee. It's the kind of place most maps forget, and truth be told, we like it that way. Folks around here keep to themselves, always have. We don't take kindly to gossip, and we certainly don't go looking for trouble. But sometimes, trouble finds you anyway. The worst night of my life started with a knock on my door that came way too late. It was January 11th, cold, quiet, and moonless. I was sipping on a hot toddy, halfway through a crossword, when the banging started. Not just a knock, but a pounding, like someone was using both fists. It was Caleb Henson, soaked through his clothes, and shaking like a leaf. His face was pale and slack, like the life had been sucked out of him. They took Sam, he choked out. They took my boy. Slow down, Caleb, I said, grabbing my coat. Who took him? He looked back toward the dark, tree-covered road. He came down. I don't know, but it wasn't people. I'd known Caleb most of my life, worked alongside him back when he was a dispatcher. He wasn't the kind to cry wolf. Start from the top, I said. He wiped his face. We were camping out at Whiskey Ridge. Just me, Sam, and the dog. Thought we'd try out his new Christmas gear. Get some father-son time before school started. Up again. That ridge was a known spot for hunters and campers. Dense woods, rocky terrain. Plenty of places for a kid to wander off, sure. But Caleb wasn't careless. We heard something circling the camp after dark, he said. Heavy. Footsteps. Real slow. I thought it might be a bear at first, but the dog, Buddy, he was howling like it was the devil himself. And then the smell hit us. What kind of smell? Rotten meat and wet leaves. Like something that died a week ago, then dragged itself out of the grave. I grabbed my keys and radioed dispatch. Told them I was headed up Whiskey Ridge with an emergency situation. Caleb and I reached the site just after midnight. His truck was parked half off the trail, hazard lights blinking in the pitch-black woods. The fire pit was still smoldering. His son's gear, tiny boots, a thermos, a little red flashlight, was all there. Scattered like someone had dropped them mid-run. I called out, shined my flashlight into the woods, and that's when I saw the first track. It was maybe 20 inches long, 5 deep toes, wide as my forearm. Not a bear, not human. Too large, too symmetrical. No claw marks. There were more tracks, deep ones, far too deep for the snow cover we had that night. Whatever made them was heavy, and it walked on 2 legs. We followed the trail for about a quarter mile, heading downhill. The prints led to a small ravine, and at the bottom, we found Buddy. He was dead, not mauled, not torn apart, just crushed. Like something had stepped on him and kept walking. Caleb fell apart when he saw the dog. I turned away, and that's when I noticed the trees. A few young pines lining the ravine were snapped in half, snapped clean, at the mid-trunk, 10 feet up. That doesn't happen from wind or ice. Only a massive force, applied suddenly, could do that. We never found Sam that night. What we did find was a smear of blood on a tree trunk, 20 yards past the ravine, right next to another strange print, this one kneeling, almost like something crouched there and watched us as we approached. I filed the official report as child missing in remote terrain. But in my own notes, I wrote something different. Possible encounter. Non-human, bipedal, unknown origin. That was 10 years ago. I still get reports from hikers and hunters, strange howls, movement in the trees, that same god-awful smell. But they never last long. People learn to look the other way, or they leave. Caleb never recovered. His wife divorced him. He drinks now, barely makes eye contact when I see him in town. He stopped speaking to me altogether after I told him what I really believed. But I think he knows. Deep down, he knows what's out there. Sometimes, on clear winter nights. I still walk up to the edge of town and look out at those dark hills, waiting, listening, because something's still up there, and it remembers. I grew up in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas, the kind of place where the trees are older than memory, and the sky feels closer when the fog rolls in. Our family lived in a rundown farmhouse my granddad built back in the 50s. No neighbors. Within shouting distance. Just miles of forest and the kind of silence that presses on your chest after dark. Dad called it God's country. Said it with pride, even when the well froze over in winter or the generator sputtered out for the third time that month. My mom left when I was 10, took my baby sister with her, and didn't look back. Dad said she wasn't built for the woods. I wasn't sure I was either. He made a living as a hunting guide, mostly for out-of-towners chasing the idea of a trophy buck. I tagged along when I got older, partly to help, partly because there wasn't much else to do. I learned to track, to stay quiet, to pay attention to what the forest was trying to tell you. Animals don't lie, Dad used to say. They just leave signs and let you figure the rest out. One late October, we took a client up near Rich Mountain, some tech guy from Dallas who paid extra for an off-grid experience. We hiked 6 hours into a part of the forest I'd never seen before. Trees stood too close together, their trunks pale and warped, like they'd grown twisted just to block out the sun. I remember getting that crawling sensation on my skin, the one that makes the hairs stand up on your arms. The silence was too clean. No birds, no bugs. Just the occasional wind hissing through pine needles like a warning. We made camp near a creek that trickled down from the ridge. The client was asleep by 9, passed out in his tent with a bottle of bourbon tucked under his arm. Dad and I sat by the fire. He sipped coffee. I cleaned the rifle. Neither of us spoke much, but that wasn't unusual. Then I heard it. Not a howl, not a growl, something in between. It came from up the slope, maybe a quarter-mile away, deep and guttural-like, a bear clearing its throat, but too long, too deliberate. Dad froze mid-sip. His eyes flicked toward the trees. Pack up, now what? We just got here. Now Micah. He only used my full name when he meant business. I stood, heart hammering in my ribs. He started dousing the fire. I could tell he was trying to stay calm, but his hands were shaking. Was that a bear? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He looked at me, eyes hard. Bears don't stalk. They don't wait till nightfall to make noise like that. We left the tents, just grabbed the packs and the guns, and headed downhill, fast but quiet. Dad didn't speak again until we reached a clearing half a mile south, where the trees opened, up just enough to let the moon spill across the grass. He stopped, scanned the ridge. Then he said, "There's something old in these woods, boy. Older than any animal we know, and it watches." That night, we didn't sleep. We just sat with our backs to a rock face and waited for dawn. I saw something move through the trees, around 3 a.m., tall, dark, and fast. I tried to tell myself it was a shadow, but shadows don't have shoulders like that. They don't hunch or breathe or look back at you when they pass. After that trip, Dad never guided another hunter past that ridge, said it wasn't worth the money. He aged fast after that, like something out there had taken a piece of him. Years passed. I moved away, tried city life, got married, but Arkansas calls you back, especially when your old man dies alone in the woods he swore he knew better than anyone. I came back last fall to bury him. The sheriff found his body a mile from the old farmhouse, half buried in leaves, chest crushed like he'd been stepped on. The coroner said a bear, but I knew better. I stayed in the house after the funeral. Something about it made me feel closer to him. Nights were hard, too quiet. I kept waking up to strange sounds, knocking on the porch, pacing on the roof, low, groaning whistles from beyond the tree line. One night, I stepped out with the shotgun and a flashlight. The beam caught movement in the orchard out back, something tall ducking behind a tree. I ran out there, stupid with adrenaline. When I reached the tree, nothing was there, just deep prints in the dirt. Not boot prints, not paws either. Long, wide, with toes. I followed them until they stopped at the edge of the property, right where the tree line thickens like a wall. That's when I saw it. 15 feet away, just beyond the light, something was watching me. I could see the shape of its head, the outline of its shoulders. I swear, it smiled, just a little, and then it was gone.